Hello everyone, I hope that you're doing well this week. This I believe is our second to last um, online lecture of the semester. Might be the third to last, but I think second to last. And what we're going to be talking about today is preventing poverty through educational policy as well as a little bit on labor policy. Now this is going to be a little bit of an abbreviated lecture because in a normal world, we would have had a little bit of discussion in the class, but normally I would have shown a movie on education policy. So we're just going to roll with that. Hopefully you got an email from me about the schedule of assignments and whatnot for the rest of the semester. I give information on another discussion board on exams 3 and 4, due dates, and whatnot. So if you haven't already checked your email, please check it now. So let's do this. So we're going to talk a little bit about education policies in the United States. We're going to talk about labor policies in the United States. And we're going to, I want you to think about what does educational policy in the U.S.? We talk about policy as being everything that a government does or does not do for the welfare of the people, and that policy is a reflection of the values of the society. So think about what our educational policies say about our values as a country. What do we actually understand about why people are living in poverty? What can social workers do to address inequity and injustice in educational policy? And I want you to really think about how are education and employment right now impacted by the crisis that we are going through in the world. So if you look at the PowerPoint, right on the third slide, you'll see a chart. That chart talks about employment rates and earnings by educational attainment. Now, this is as of 2018. So if you look at that, you will clearly see that the higher in general, the higher a level of education you have, the lower the prevalence of unemployment. So for example, in the United States in 2018, the overall rate of employment was 3.2%. In people with less than a high school diploma, it was 5.6%. In people with a high school diploma only, it was 4.1%. If you get all the way up to a master's degree, which I know many of you are planning to go on for your master's in social work, with the master's degree, that goes down to 2.1% unemployment rate. A doctoral degree, which are my people, goes down to a 1.6% unemployment rate. Then if you look at the median usual weekly earnings, so median, if you recall stats class, median is the middle number. It's not the mean, it's quite literally the number that sits in the middle of all the different numbers that are in the data set you're looking at. So this is going to be a physical middle and not based on how many people are actually making small amounts, what amounts they're making. So if you look at this, people with less than a high school diploma, on average, the median income weekly, that's gross income, was $553. All workers in the United States in 2018, the median weekly pay was $932. If you go up to people with a doctoral degree, that weekly pay gross was $1,825. I would like to be that person someday with my doctoral degree. But if you look at the chart, you will see very clearly that the higher your degree of either education or training, because a professional degree is also on there, is the more likely you are to be employed and the more likely you are to actually earn a living or better than living wage. And these are for persons aged 25 and older, for full-time wage and salary earners. So that shows us very clearly that higher levels of education relate to better financial outcomes and better employment outcomes. It's a no-brainer. So if you look at some important U.S. educational policies, you have the National Defense Education Act of 1958, and all this is in your readings. I expect you're doing the readings. In 1965, there was the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and if you know your history, that was part of the Civil Rights era, with a 1988 reauthorization focusing on student achievement. We had the begin of charter schools and vouchers. You had the Head Start program in early childhood education, which we have briefly discussed in class before. And then in higher education, you had the 1862 Morrill Act, which was a land grant The GI Bill of 1944, which basically gave people enlisted in the armed services the right to a college education paid for by the US government. The GI Bill is still in effect today. And the National Defense Student Loan Program, then followed by the Student Aid and Fiscal Responsibility Act. So let's just take a moment and talk a little bit about what those policies really mean. So if you think about education today, any number of you probably have taken out student loans to be where you are right now. Some of you probably have the Excelsior Scholarship, which is great. It is itself an active state policy. But I want you to think about, what it took to get your student loans. Think about what's happening with student loans right now in the United States. I've spoken before about a relative of mine who was, people who were in fancy private schools. So when you look right now, I believe in-state tuition at a place like Brockport right now, let's say, because I don't even know the exact numbers, let's say it's $10,000 a year. So assuming you were not paying any money towards your tuition, and this is not counting room and board, this is not counting your books, all that stuff. So let's say if you were not putting a penny into your education, you left here with $40,000 in student loans at probably an average interest rate of 5 to 6%. One faculty member in particular had student loans that started out as $140,000 with interest. By the time they're all paid off, it's going to be $240,000 in student loan debt. So think about how much it costs for an education, and then how much you need to make every year in order to pay off your student loans. Someday, if you have student loans, chances are you're going to be on the hook for them. There have been policies for loan forgiveness, especially if you are a public servant or somebody in the helping professions. Those forgiveness programs are likely going to go away if they ever existed in the first place. There's a movement right now to do away with student loan debt for nurses and doctors because of what they're doing for the nation right now. So think about how much that would help people and the impact that would have on the financial institutions that did the lending. So then, if you look at federal employment policy, the Department of Labor was established in 1913. We're talking about employment now. The Fair Labor Standards Act was put in place in 1938. Under FDR, Francis Perkins was the first Secretary of Labor. The National Labor Relations Act of 1935. So again, this is on the heels of the New Deal. Legalized collective bargaining. Collective bargaining was unions. The Taft-Hartley Act of 1947 then restricted unions and the power that they had to bargain on behalf of their members. So I don't know how much you remember about the books you may have read in high school or middle school, but if you recall Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. The Jungle was a book that was written as an expose on the meatpacking industry, and it exposed the unsafe work environments that people were forced to be in for the sake of a meager paycheck. And it was because of that expose that there started to be a look at companies have to provide for the safety of their employees. Which brings me a little bit to what's going on right now. As we know, with the current crisis, essential workers are basically every day putting themselves in the line of grave danger. And I'm not just talking about police, fire, I'm talking about EMTs, paramedics, doctors, nurses, lab technicians, everybody who works in a healthcare setting. I'm talking about food service workers, grocery workers, mail carriers, delivery people. And I want you to think about the fact that the reason why we even began thinking about the need of those for those people to have safe working standards was because of a book that was written about the meatpacking industry. So what is going on right now? As somebody who has used Instacart, I can tell you that right now, for the most part, Instacart is on strike. And they're on strike because of unsafe working conditions. They're asking for $5 in order hazard pay. They're asking for a higher minimum tip, which I don't think is too much to ask for the people that are going to bring eggs, milk, and bread to your door so you don't have to go out. They want paid sick leave if you come down with the virus or if you have a pre-existing condition that prevents you from being able to safely work. And they want the company to provide them with basic equipment to maintain some level of relative safety, like masks, gloves, hand sanitizer, soap, wipes, and whatnot. That's not a lot to ask for from a company that is worth over $8 billion. So those are the sorts of things that you need to think about when you think about employment policy. And these are what's called gig workers. These are people that don't have a union. Hopefully they will get one out of this. But there is no union to fight for them. So they are individually and collectively working together in a system where they have no unified voice. So when you talk about the war on poverty, so the war on poverty, hang on one second. The war on poverty came about during the 1960s, the Civil Rights Act. So the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964 sought to break the cycle of poverty because we thought we knew why people were poor. It started economic development administrations and basically the thought of looking at society and saying, clearly the reasons why we thought people were poor may not be the case, so let's really look at why people are living in poverty. So LBJ and the Economic Opportunity Act brought about the Job Corps, neighborhood youth groups, and work study programs, the first ever. Bill Clinton's AmeriCorps allowed people 18 and older to earn money for college or for vocational education, that's job training, technological training, in return for national service. 1962 brought the Manpower Development and Training Act. 1973 brought the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act. 1982 brought the Job Training Partnership Act. In 1988, the Workforce Investment Act, that was under Ronald Reagan. So let's talk about the minimum wage. So the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 established a minimum wage, the 40-hour work week, and the concept of overtime, which is supposed to be any time that you work over the 40-hour week. At the time, minimum wage was 25 cents an hour. Right now, minimum wage is a little over $7 an hour. Now, I'm not sure if I've talked about this in this class, but research has shown that there is no place in the United States where minimum wage at a full-time 40 hours a week rate can pay for a fair market apartment. No place in the United States. If you look at how much you're supposed to pay for housing. That was Artie. If you've seen the video on my YouTube channel, I've shown you a little video of Artie. Artie's angry because he's in the other room. So anyway, minimum wage in 1938 was 25 cents an hour. Liberals argue that raising minimum wage improves wages for everybody, whereas conservatives argue that higher minimum wages increase unemployment. And it's funny what's going on in the world right now, because if you recall, back in the day, Bernie Sanders, who has dropped out of the presidential race, has been pushing for $15 an hour minimum wage. And reality is, in New York, you need roughly $36 an hour at full time to pay fair market for a one-bedroom apartment. But $15 an hour is a start. So I believe it's in New York City that they started paying a minimum wage of $15 an hour. Yes, that's Artie again. And people, particularly people on the conservative side, kept saying, what, people who are flipping burgers, people working at a grocery store, they don't deserve $15 an hour for such menial work. Well, who's keeping the nation going right now? It's the people that we said didn't deserve the $15 an hour minimum wage. Just a little side note. So, unemployment reached 10% in November of 2009 during the last recession, which began in 2008. The Bush administration passed TARP to rescue the banks. The Obama administration passed the ARRA. So I want you just to take a moment and think about what the crisis right now is doing to education and employment. You're all feeling the effects right now. That's why you're watching me on a YouTube channel instead of hearing me in a classroom where we can all argue with each other about policy. So it's impacting your education. It is impacting K through 12 education because most schools in the United States have moved to remote learning. which means that with kids being at home, parents who are a part of the essential workforce have to find a way to get childcare, or they can't work. So that is reducing the force of essential workers that's out there, and it's creating a hardship for people with children. And not to mention that these are now parents and guardians who have to figure out how to educate their kids at home. So that's the issue with education. In terms of employment right now, it is estimated that unemployment in the United States could reach as high as 25 to 30% after this pandemic is over. In the past week alone, 6.6 million people in New York have filed, it might be New York, I'm not sure if it's federal, but have filed for unemployment benefits. The unemployment portal for New York State has been crashing every single day because so many people have lost their jobs and are scrambling for a way to survive right now. So I want you to think about all that. There's a discussion board that's going to go along with this. Do the reading. This will be on the next exam. I miss you guys a lot. Hopefully you're staying safe, you're staying healthy, practicing social distancing, washing your hands. If you get deliveries, tip your delivery workers. They're literally putting their lives on the line so you can get what you need to survive. Have a great day. I'll see you next time.